So Deuteronomy 24, turn to your iPod or your iPhone or your laptop, or if you're really old-fashioned, your paper Bible. You know, I feel like we're sort of at that place, you know, when they went from scrolls to the, I mean, it feels like we're in that transition. I was just at a senior pastor's conference, and very few guys had their Bibles. Every time they open their iPods or their iPhones, and they're scrolling through, and I don't have that technology. I mean, I feel like my cell phone's like a dial-up or something, you know. Got to crank it. Hello. But these guys, I mean, it's amazing. I mean, they were like, we were looking through, and one of the guys was like, the guy would say something. He'd look it up in a commentary, look it up in the Greek. You know, he was like, I was just amazed. I was sitting there watching the guy just going, wow. It was like a Bible study within a Bible study. And plus we got to watch some TV during the sermon. That was sort of not, no, we did not do that. We did not do that. I'm kidding. But it was amazing what that thing did. It was a Bible. You know, like if you guys have a study Bible, you have notes at the bottom. Do you read the notes at the bottom sometimes? Well, this is notes on steroids. And you're hooked to the internet and you got all of those things. But anyway, chapter 24 and 25, open your scrolls, or whatever you got. And, you know, this is a great passage again, as I mentioned, because as we looked at 23 and we've been going through here, 24 and 25, there's a number of the passages quoted in the New Testament that give us a handle on understanding the heart of God in giving some of these laws. And as we're going to see, some of these laws weren't at face value. They were given by God out of concession. It wasn't because he desired it or invented it or wanted it. It was simply because he knew the people would be unwilling to have God's best. And so God said, I'll give you second best or third best or fourth best, but stay in the family. Don't leave the family. Don't leave the nation of Israel, if you would, even though what you're doing may not be the best. And so we see here, for example, in chapter 24, when a man takes a wife and marries her, and it happens that she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some uncleanness in her. Now, I just want to stop here and address this, because earlier in Deuteronomy, we already addressed the issue of uncleanness sexually. If a woman was found to not be a virgin, she was to be stoned to death. Okay? So we're not talking about this. We're simply saying that this word uncleanness in a very generic way, it really, what does it mean? And so through the years, the rabbis would say, what is uncleanness, you know? And you get to the New Testament time of Christ, you have Hillel and Shema, and they went back and forth. You know, one said, if a woman burned your toast, that's uncleanness. You can divorce her. All you had to do was give her a piece of paper that says, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you, and she's supposed to pack up and move out. Another guy said, no. Uncleanness, it was simply she had committed adultery on you. And everything in between. And so here, the guy, he found something that's upsetting to him. He doesn't like. She flosses in bed or whatever it is, I don't know. And he writes her a certificate of divorce, puts it in her hand, and sends her out of his house. Now, when she's departed from his house and goes and becomes another man's wife, if the latter husband detests her and writes her a certificate of divorce, puts it in her hand and sends her out of the house, or if the latter husband dies who took her as wife, then her former husband who divorced her must not take her back to be his wife, as she's been defiled. For that is an abomination before the Lord, and you shall not bring sin on the land which the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. I just want to say something here quickly. He says, the guy says, I don't want to marry you anymore. You know, you lost your front tooth, or, you know, you got gray hair now, or whatever it is. I need you to go. She ends up remarrying. And then something happens to that marriage. She comes back to the first guy. God says, I'm not going to let this soap opera go on. Now, I can tell you from observation, the churches that have made a strong stand against divorce, there's really not that much divorce in the church. But I've also seen in churches where there is not a strong stand, it's like everybody, I understand why you got a divorce, you know, it's okay, it happens, you know, it's not the best, but life goes on, and people just start feeling more freely to divorce. And you have it. And, you know, I've talked to people from other churches, and they said it was very confusing to raise my kids in the church. Especially, you know, you got, you know, couple A, they're in the choir, and you got couple B in the choir, and couple A divorce, couple B divorce, and in many cases, they end up marrying each other's spouses. And they're sort of gone for 3 or 4, 6 months, and then they all come back. And you got them all in the choir again, but they're not married to each other anymore. And all of these people that used to be friends in the church are now stepbrothers and stepsisters. And it becomes this soap opera, and it becomes very confusing. And I've talked to people saying, you know, when my kids got married, they did have a very weak sense of staying married. Because they saw so much fluctuation in the church. They saw so many of the people in the church marrying and divorce and remarrying, and kids and stepkids and stepdads. And it gave them a sense of, it's okay, this is normal. This soap opera type thing is a part of the way it works, even in the church. And I can just simply tell you by observation, it's something that's doomed to eventually hit some kind of point and the church start falling apart and dissolving. And so here Moses said, you write a certificate of divorce, she leaves, she marries somebody else, she just can't come back to the first guy. Sort of the end of the teaching on the subject. Now you say, well, what do I really do with that? I mean, God spoke this is God's word. He is allowing divorce. So what do I do with this teaching? Well, this is where we have the New Testament. You might want to turn in your Bibles to Matthew 19, unless you're tired, and I'm going to put it up on the video here, or pull it up on your iPhone, or your shoe phone, like Maxwell Smart, right? New Maxwell Smart have a shoe phone. So you can look in Matthew 19, verse 7, and then we'll come back to verse 3. But there in 19, verse 7, he said to them, why then did Moses command to give a certificate of divorce and put her away? So we see them asking Jesus' commentary on this very verse. So this is pretty great, isn't it? Because we're not going to just hear my commentary or somebody else's commentary in history. We actually get to hear God's commentary on Deuteronomy 24. So let's go into the whole subject here, starting at Matthew 19:3. And this is where the Pharisees also came to Jesus, testing him and saying, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for just any reason? And so again, there's two very distinct teachings, a lot of things in between. A lot of people have a lot of opinions on this. So can a man divorce a wife just for any reason? So the word uncleanness there, does it mean for any reason? And in verse 4, he answered and said to them, have you not read that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female? Now I just want to stop here and make a notice. Jesus bypasses the law. He says, forget the law from Moses forward. I'm going to go back to the book of Genesis. In the beginning of creation, in the book of Genesis, God in the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife. Remember, at this point, Adam and Eve didn't have a father or mother, so it's a clear bedrock of creation, part of creation. And the two shall become one flesh. So then, they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no man separate. You know, that's the one thing that you can be very confident about Adam and Eve. They had no option but to stay married. You know, it wasn't like, Eve, you're getting gray hair. I don't know, you know. I'm going to divorce you. Oh, no, I can't do that. There's nobody else. You know, it's either you or the gorilla, and, you know, as irritating as you are sometimes, the gorilla is more irritating, or whatever it is. I don't know how he worked that out. But if you look, there just wasn't option B. And that was God's intention, to make it clear to us that God has a perfect plan. And the perfect plan is for the two to become one flesh and remain that way. So you look at a human body, and if you took a chainsaw and started at the forehead and just started cutting right through the middle of a person's body, it wouldn't be very healthy for them. And this is what he's saying. You got to understand, when you're cutting right down between two, you're cutting one flesh. The two are two separate people, but no longer. In the Lord's eyes, in the spiritual reality of it, they are one. That's how God sees it. But quickly, they know this. Okay, this is the bedrock of creation. But after the bedrock of creation, Moses in Matthew 19, verse 7, said, hey, but we can give a certificate of divorce. Now, why did God say this? There's not a lot of explanation on this. There's not like 10 chapters to explain divorce. Would have been helpful. But he said, notice this, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, permitted you to divorce your wives. But from the beginning, it was not so. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery. Whoever marries her is divorced commits adultery. His disciples said to him, wow, if such is the case of a man and his wife, it's better not to marry. I mean, they got it. When you marry, it's for life, period. That should be the only thought you have. And if you're going into marriage, in the back of your mind, there's this thing, if it makes me unhappy, if it's not fulfilling me, if I get bored with this, if I find somebody prettier, if I, fall in love with my secretary, or, whatever, I can always get a divorce and start a new marriage. That clearly was not in the mind of God. And Jesus in the New Testament said, it is still not in the mind of God. Why was there a certificate of divorce? This is what we've talked about in the other parts of the law, where God talks about polygamy, having more than one wife. He talked about having slaves and owning slaves. We discover as we go on in the New Testament, God doesn't want polygamy, but he allowed it. God doesn't want slavery, but he allowed it because it was so entrenched in the society. He knew if he came down and said, you, as God's people, no slaves, I'm out of here. I'm going to move to Midian. I'm going to move back to Egypt. He knew that the people spiritually were not founded enough, mature enough, rich enough to really hear God's heart. He knew, you guys can't hear what I really have to say. So I'm going to give you a lesser option. And actually, it's a rather serious option. You now, in the New Testament, with fuller light, fuller revelation, You need to understand this is serious business. As we go on the New Testament, I'm not going to do a whole teaching on this. You can go listen to Matthew 19. I do a whole teaching on this. But Paul basically says, if you do come to the place saying, I can't stay married to this person any longer, divorce them, but stay single the rest of your life. That's your option. And you say, oh, that's horrible, you know. You know what? This is a serious thing. Marriage is a serious thing. Marriage, a commitment in marriage is a serious thing. And, you know, I think that people are just foolish sometimes, not wanting to see the real ramifications. You know, we talked about this morning smoking. I don't know if you've been by the bedside of somebody dying of lung cancer or somebody with emphysema spitting up blood into a bucket. Okay, I have. I've seen my relatives do that. Okay, and to then turn around and walk outside after you see one of your relatives trying to talk with you, but he's cacking and spitting up blood in a bucket, and you walk outside and see a 13-year-old kid with a cigarette. Okay, you want to have a talk with him because he doesn't understand the ramifications of how devastating this is eventually one day going to be to his wife and his kids and the people that love him. You can say the same with alcohol. Oh, it's okay to drink. You know, the chances are, I don't know what the statistics are, 10%, 20%, 50%, 70%. The chances are when you take that first drink of alcohol, there is a percent, whatever that percent is, that you'll become an alcoholic. Is it really worth the fight? Is it really worth you spending hours of your week or just stress on your life trying to fight this vice? Wouldn't it be better just to drink a Diet Coke and not fight the fight of alcohol? Now, I understand the world. I understand they're bringing it and everything's shiny and the commercials and everybody's having a good time. And it's just a lie, guys. And there comes a point where you just go, can't you wake up and realize that you're playing with fire? That whatever satisfaction you might get out of smoking or satisfaction of drinking, it is not worth the possibilities of the harm it can bring. No matter how much freedom you have, no matter how much it doesn't convict you, no matter how much, you are being stupid. And maybe you don't become an alcoholic, but you got to understand, you drinking alcohol is giving your kids a license to drink alcohol. So you never became an alcoholic, but what are the odds of one of them becoming an alcoholic? And they have gotten their license from drinking from you. But the fact is as parents, you don't drink. Hopefully, many of the convictions that you have, your kids will have, and they just know it's not a part of our family activity to drink. And it actually will be one more hurdle for them to get to the alcohol, or a huge hurdle. And what I'm trying to say here is that it's very clear in the mind of the Lord that you either plan on marriage for life and whatever it takes, make it, or don't get married at all. And Paul makes it very clear in 1 Corinthians 7, the higher road is to stay single, because you're free to minister without being encumbered by a wife and all of this. He just says, if you have the gift of singleness, use it to your advantage. But not a lot of people have that gift of singleness. I certainly don't. But nevertheless, it's just a powerful moment. So I think the more larger lesson here we learn in these first 4 verses is, although in the law, at the first glance, it appeared like, wow, God's given us a license to get divorced. No. In the mind of God, he simply was given it out of concession because of the hardness of their hearts. He knew that some of these people, they were going to divorce no matter what Moses or God or anybody else said. They've already purposed in their heart they're going to divorce. And you know what? we would rather you stay in the country of Israel, and hopefully in a period of time you'll grow. And I cannot tell you how many people through the years who divorced have come back and said, I can see it now. There was a love of God that could have kept our marriage together, but I had just shut the door on God. I just told him I don't want that love because I want the marriage to end. I don't want the forgiveness because I want the marriage to end. I don't want the grace to stay together because I want this marriage to end. And really, it was my stubbornness just wanting to hurt the person, to just, grass is greener on the other side of the fence, just to end this thing, to start a new chapter in my life. And I realize now, after being a Christian 10 or 15 years and often remarried with a new family, I can see it now. Because I'm at the same place now in my second marriage that I was at my first marriage. And my tendency is to want to do exactly what I did in my first marriage, just divorce the bum and get on with my life. But yet I realize that I don't want to start on marriage number 3. And so I've got to figure out how to be a person that can stay married even though it's unhappy, even though it's hard, even though it's difficult. There has to be an answer here other than divorce. And it's like, you got it. You got it. You're gonna come. And so I'm just telling you now, you throw away the marriage, you're going to come to this same road. It may take you 5 years, but you're going to come to this same fork in the road again. And if your answer is divorce again, it's going to be marriage 3, and marriage 4, and marriage 5. As we know, today it happens. Or you just, like the woman who married 5 times before, and now she's living with a guy. Forget marriage 6, I'll just live with him. And that is what's happening in our society, isn't it? Now, in saying all of this, I do want to say that there are people that really are pushed into a place they have no option but divorce. And I understand that. And often people are being divorced and they're fighting it, but it's not in their control. And so I don't want to say that if you're here and divorced tonight, that you're under some kind of condemnation. You know what? At this point, maybe you're sitting here going, I could have made the first marriage work. I see it now. But I'm already married to somebody else. Get your eyes on the Lord. Follow the Lord. What does it mean to me in the future? I don't know. But when you stand before Christ, He'll work it out. I think for sure at least loss of reward. I think there's probably opportunities in this lifetime you've missed out on. Blessings that could have been there that you'll just never experience in this lifetime. And so I think that you've taken plan B, but God will bless you on plan B. Or maybe you're on plan C or D or Z. God will bless you there. Wherever you are, there comes a point where Paul said, I just got to let go of what's behind and press forward to that which is ahead. But either way, the heart of God in a moment is that He can give you grace to stay married. And that's the point. It's so weird I have to sit here and talk about this for such a long time, huh? It's like saying water's wet. I mean, when I started the ministry 25 years ago, I didn't have to sit and explain this for a long time. Everybody understood. Yeah, you stay married. That's next verse, Brian. Okay. Well, verse 5. When a man has taken a new wife, number 1, he shall not go out to war. Number 2, he shall be charged with any business. He's to have a year off, we'll find out. Number 3, he shall be free at home for 1 year. No war, no work, a year's vacation. And then number 4, you are to bring happiness to his wife whom he has taken. You've got a year to figure out how to quit being a jerk and start being a good husband. Focus on that. No war, no business, vacation. we're going to lessen all the stress we can in your life so you can just focus. You know, people often say, well, the God of the Old Testament is such a mean guy. Sounds pretty nice here. I mean, I think this is pretty wonderful, pretty hard to do in our culture, isn't it? And in verse 6, no man shall take the lower or the upper millstone in a pledge, for he takes one's living in the pledge. So again, we're going to go into more of this later when you're loaning somebody money. And you loan them whatever it was, $100, and they said they would pay you on Friday, and they don't have the money. And you say, well, I'm going to, confiscate your millstone, which is how you ground the wheat, until you give me the $100. And guess what? You can't make a living until you give me my money back. And God says, do not do that. So, you don't take the hammer from the carpenter, okay? You don't take the paintbrush out of the painter's hand. You don't take away their ability to make money that they might pay you back. And again, you say, well, that's a no-brainer. Well, I'll tell you what, up until a couple hundred years ago, this is exactly what they did. They would get somebody to be thrown in prison until they paid him back, which is sort of stupid because the guy can't make any money while he's in prison. And in verse 7, if a man is found kidnapping any of his brethren of the children of Israel and mistreats him and steals him, then the kidnapper shall die. You shall put away the evil from among you. Again, law cannot make somebody morally better. It just suppresses the evil of the evil people. And in order to suppress the evil of evil people, you have to have a punishment fitting the crime. If the punishment does not fit the crime, you'll have the crime. Case in point, in most countries today, when somebody murders somebody, they're not going to be put to death. Or if they do, it's going to take 40 years. And so they know. It's like, well, one, I got to get caught. Number two, I got to get convicted. I could get a good lawyer. Number three, the jury has to all agree I'm free, any reasonable doubt. And then if I do go to prison, I get life. That means I'm out in 7 years, after I, get to finish my doctorate in prison and bench 500 pounds. And, it's almost like the bad case scenario is not bad enough, and people are willing to roll the dice. And in this case here, again, with kidnappers, it's the same thing. And so what we have in our culture and many other cultures is very evil crimes growing more and more and more, simply because the punishment doesn't fit the crime. Therefore, the evil is not suppressed in the evil person. And in verse 8, take heed in an outbreak of leprosy that you carefully observe and do according to all that is the priests and Levites shall teach you, just as I commanded them, so you shall be careful to do. So we covered that in the book of Leviticus in a little more detail. Verse 9, remember what the Lord your God did to Miriam on the way when you came out of Egypt. So remember the story there in chapter 12 of Numbers, where Miriam and Aaron were complaining about Moses marrying an Ethiopian woman. Again, God had said to not marry outside the Jewish race. But for Moses, he wasn't really part of the Jewish race. He was outside of it. He had no tribe. He wasn't a part of a tribe. He was sort of outside of that. So it was irrelevant whether he married this Egyptian woman or not. And God, again, maybe out of concession allowed him. It wasn't God's best, but it was out of concession. But they griped about it, and they're, instead of coming to the Lord, they complained about it, and Miriam was sort of the instigator of it. Aaron sort of followed along, and she got leprosy. And Moses cried out and said, please take it away. And God said, if a dad spit in his daughter's face, she would at least be unclean for 7 days. Send her outside the camp for 7 days, and then I'll heal the leprosy. Well, in verse 10, when you lend your brother anything, you shall not go into his house to get his pledge. So again, if you're loaning money, you're not to be oppressive about loaning money. Jesus said in the New Testament on this, lend, not expecting back. If your brother's truly in need, we're not talking about he wants to buy a new 50-inch Sony television. Sounds pretty good, actually. But that's not why he's loaning money. He's trying to feed his family. And so, again, don't go into his house and take some family precious jewel, take his mother-in-law's ashes or whatever and until he pays it back. I don't know. But leave him alone. Don't oppress him over this financial thing. He'll pay you back when he can. You shall stand outside, and the man to whom you lend shall bring the pledge out to you. So if you need something need a pledge, you want a pledge, he'll bring one to you. Again, Jesus would say, don't get a pledge, just give without asking back. And if the man is poor, and you shall not keep his pledge overnight. And so again, if you do take this pledge, before nightfall comes, you got to give it back. You don't want this poor guy to have to worry and fret over the little bit he has. You have it. Don't cause his life to be more stressful than it is. And in verse 13, you shall in any case return the pledge to him again when the sun goes down, that he may sleep in his own garment and bless you. And it shall be righteous to you before the Lord your God. So in particular, as the case was, they would take the garment. And in those days, the garment was also your sleeping bag. It was also your blanket. And so this will really motivate the guy to pay me back before nightfall, because he might freeze to death without his covering. And God is saying, no, just bless him, give to him. And he's there cuddled up in his robe and he's sleeping. He's just like blessed because of your gracious attitude. And God's going to take note of that. It says in the Proverbs that he who lends to the poor lends to God, and that the Lord shall repay him. That there is a direct correlation and blessing from the Lord in doing that. And in verse 14, you shall not oppress a hired servant who is poor and needy, whether one of your brethren or one of the aliens who is in your land within your gates. Each day you shall give him his wages, and not let the sun go down on it, for he is poor and has set his heart on it, lest he cry out against you to the Lord, and it be sin to you. Again, you've got people that are scraping to get by, and so here they come to work for you, to do your yard work or clean your house or work in your company, and you taking advantage of them because you know they're in a vulnerable place. Some time back, a lady had talked to me who had cleaned somebody's house, a Christian couple's house, and in the midst of cleaning the house, she spilt some product, and it sort of discolored a little piece of their carpet, their shag carpet. All they had to do is just cut it, and you can't see it anymore. But they came unglued and started screaming at her and told her to get out and told her they weren't going to pay her a day's wage. And she just came weeping. She's a Christian lady going, what do I do with this? These guys are Christians. They go to church, and this is how they did it, And my heart just ripped out. I really wanted to rip into those people and just read the scripture here to them and say, look, these people are going to cry out to the Lord against you because of this. You don't want to have that oppressive, elitist attitude. I'm the white-collar worker, you're the blue-collar worker, and I can kick you around because you need this job and you can't quit no matter how bad I treat you or how much I take an advantage of you or how little I pay you. Just be glad I'm throwing you some crumbs. You know what? It's just beyond grievous that somebody would take that attitude towards the fellow man. But let me tell you, it's happening all over the world. So each day, give him his wages. He needs that money to go home and feed his family. Don't say, I'll pay you next week. I'll pay you next week. I'll pay you next week. I grew up in Central California, and some unscrupulous farmers, they would actually bring in the illegals to work in their fields, and they'd give them a place to stay and give them a little bit of food. And they would tell them at the end of the harvest season we'll pay you. That's when I get paid, and I'll pay you, and you get this big lump sum of money. Until then, you got a place to stay, and I'll give you some food. And then right before he's supposed to pay him, he calls in the Border Patrol to get them all taken out so they don't have to pay him. That was a very common thing. And it's just like, you know what? I don't know how much money these farmers make by not paying their workers like that, but they've got to go to the hottest place in hell for such cruelty to somebody who's trying to just get by. Well, in verse 16, fathers shall not put to death their children, nor children to be put to death for their fathers. A person shall be put to death for his own sin. So again, there is not supposed to be guilt by association. You know, your father was a drunk, so you're a drunk. Your father was a liar, so you're a liar. No. In Ezekiel 18:20, later, they talk about this very clearly. In Ezekiel 18:20, it says, the soul who sins shall die. The son shall not bear the guilt of the father, nor the father bear the guilt of the son. The righteousness of the righteous shall be put upon himself, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be upon him. And so again, the children are not to have to live under the shadow of the sinfulness of their father. And today with DNA, you see that happening more and more. It's like some guy is some weirdo, and so they're waiting for his kids to become weird like the dad, you know. So this dad was a murderer, so now they're looking at you going, when are you going to start murdering? You know what? It's just so wrong. And again, do we have frailties in our human flesh? And are some of those frailties passed on in DNA? Yes. But we are all self-willed individuals that make choices. It may be harder for you to make the right choice in some areas, easier to make the right choice in other areas, but I think we all have the same amount of hard choices and easy choices to make according to our DNA. And in verse 17, you shall not pervert justice due to the stranger or the fatherless, nor take a widow's garment as a pledge. So again, you don't take an advantage of the widow or the orphan. Again, it's the same concept of mistreating the underprivileged. And of course, James, it says that true religion is taking care of widows and orphans in their need. Verse 18, but you shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you from there. Therefore I commanded you to do the same. So when you were a slave in Egypt, God had pity on you and mercy on you and hurt with you. He did not allow the Egyptians to a certain point oppress you any farther. And in verse 19, when you reap your harvest in your field, forget a sheaf in the field. You shall not go back to get it. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, the widow. The Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. In verse 20, when you beat your olive trees, you shall not go over the brow again. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. When you gather the grapes of the vineyard, you shall not glean it afterwards. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. And you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, therefore command you to do these things. So here is God's welfare system. And so this is again where people get confused. Are we to spread the wealth? Yeah, we are to spread the wealth. But not every way that we are supposed to spread the wealth is the right way. And one way I don't think we're to spread the wealth is to be forced to spread the wealth by the government. Okay, I don't get political too often, but this one really irritates me. But God says we are our brother's keeper. And so when you're cutting your fields, they were to actually do it in a round way and leave the corners of their field unharvested, and that was a welfare system. Not people standing in a line and being humiliated and degraded and taught to stand around and not do anything, but no, go out and work. And we understand there's not a job for you, but here we're creating an opportunity to create your own business. Go take the corners of the field. And you're out and you got your hay stacking up on your wagon, and all of a sudden it starts falling off, and you look back and you got this giant trail where all of this wonderful hay is dropped. You can't go and get it. It's been dropped. The Lord's in that drop. And here come some guys who's gleaning the corner of your field, and they come over and start picking up bundles and bundles and bundles of hay. They almost get as much hay as you are. Don't worry about it. Let it go. God has that for them. The same with the oil. You squeeze out the olive, and you could squeeze it again and again and again to get more oil. Stop. You get your one squeeze, leave it alone. Leave the oils for somebody else to come and squeeze out, and let them have that oil. Or the grapes. Again, you're going through and it's harvesting. You start cutting. You realize, oh, that's not a ripe one. I'm not going to cut that. That's not a good one. And you go through and then you realize, if you've ever cut grapes, they're green and the leaves are green. You can go through and miss just huge bundles of grapes. You just didn't see them. Because of your height and the angle and the sun, you can actually miss a lot of grapes. And he's saying, you get one chance at it, and you're done. Now let other people come through and have their chance at it. And so that was how God desired to spread the wealth, not by a welfare system without labor, not a welfare system where there's no personal responsibility, no welfare system that sucks away the dignity of a person and their family. But nevertheless, we are to realize that a percent of what we make, you don't have to worry about that now. It's being handled, is going to be spread to others. Well, in chapter 25, if there is a dispute between men and they come to court, and the judges may judge them and justify the righteous and condemn the wicked, then it shall be, if the wicked man deserves to be beaten, then the judge will cause him to lie down and be beaten in his presence according to his guilt with a certain number of blows. 40 blows he may give him, and no more, lest he should exceed this and beat him with many brows above these, and your brother be humiliated in your sight. And so, again, you're not to go beat the guy. You are to use self-restraint and not take justice into your own hands, and to go to the courts and allow them to listen to your case and them to enact a justice that is fitting. And in verse 4, you shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain. Now, this is an interesting verse, just one simple verse, and you go, wow. So when an ox is going in a circle, they would have a big stone, if you would, and the ox goes in a circle, and there's a tray, and as it goes over, let's say, the wheat is broken away from the shaft. And so then you come and you get the rake and you throw off the shaft, and you end up with the wheat, because it's heavier, it stays in the bowl, and then you grab the wheat. And he's saying that why that's happening, pieces of wheat are popping out, and the ox can get down and eat some of the wheat or whatever it is he's churning out. Why he's doing this, don't put a muzzle on him so you're being greedy. Just let the ox eat. Now, you say, wow, I guess God's really concerned about these ox eating while they're treading out the grain. Again, in the New Testament, 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 9 through 11, again, God gives us his commentary, this time through the Apostle Paul. This exact verse. For it's written in the law of Moses, you shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain. Now, Paul reading this says, is it an ox God's concerned about? I mean, is this principle because God's concerned about oxes? Is that why he wrote this in here? Or does he say it all together for our sakes? For our sakes, no doubt. This is written that he who plows should plow in hope. He who threshes in hope should be partaker of this hope. And if anyone has sown spiritual things for you, is it a great thing if we reap your material things. And Paul goes on basically to say that those who are full-time feeding the flock, should they not be financially supported to be able to do that thoroughly? Most churches, the average church in America is around 40 people. And typically the pastor has to work a full-time job or part-time job to make it means in order to be a pastor. But if it is possible for the pastor to be full-time, and he's saying here, don't muzzle the ox. And in essence, it's a motivational speech to the congregation, if you would, to say, don't be greedy with your tithes and your offerings. Don't hold back and muzzle the ox, which is me. The older I get, the larger I get. It seems to be more fitting, but I don't like that. Why it treads out the grain. And also many others who are ministering in the Word. So in verse 5, going back there in Deuteronomy, if a brother dwells together and one of them dies and has no son, and the widow of the dead man shall be married to a stranger outside the family, her husband's brother shall go into her and take her as wife and perform the duty of the husband's brother to her. Again, you got to understand, in this culture, when they came in, Joshua gave them a portion of the land. And in order to possess the land, you had to have sons. If you didn't, you lost the land. It just got absorbed into other families. And so here's a woman, and she's going to lose her inheritance of this land. And plus, she's not going to be able to, her husband will not have an heir possibly to the Messiah. And so, and it's interesting today, we understand with DNA and family lines that the brother is, again, and polygamy was a part of this culture, so it wasn't as today, to raise up children to his dead brother. And that was a part of the culture of the Jews, again, as a big part of it, leading to the lineage of the Messiah. And in verse 6, it shall be that the firstborn son which bears will succeed the name of his dead brother. So there's a line. First the older brother, and his name may not be blotted out of Israel. Now if the man does not want to take his brother's wife, then let his brother's wife go to the gate to the elders and say, my husband's brother refuses to raise up a name to his brother in Israel. He will not perform the duty of my husband's brother. Then the elders of his city shall call him and speak to him. And if he stands firm and says, I will not take her, this is your responsibility, they're saying, to raise up kids to your brethren. And he says, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to marry my sister-in-law. I talked to my wife about it. She's against it. Then his brother's wife shall come to him in the presence of the elders, remove his sandal from his foot, spit in his face, and answer and say, so shall it be done to the man who will not build up his brother's house. And from that point forward, verse 10, his name's changed to be called in Israel the house of him who had his sandal removed. Now, it's interesting because this is the book of Ruth. You might go home tonight, just 4 little chapters. And it's interesting because Ruth comes back with her daughter-in-law. Naomi comes back with her daughter-in-law, Ruth, who's a Moabitess of a cursed people. But yet, Naomi goes to her family, not her brother, or not her brother-in-law, her brother's family. He goes to sort of a down-the-line lineage. You know, I don't know if it was a first cousin, brothers, whatever. I don't know. But anyway, she knew who was in order of the line. And the guy who was first in the order was Boaz. And basically, Naomi said to Ruth, you go and you present yourself to Boaz. You make it clear that you have an expectation of him in this. And Boaz went to the elders of the city, and they said, actually, there is somebody in front of you. And let's talk to him. And so the guy came in, and they talked to him, and he said, nope, can't do it. And Boaz said, well, I want to be the one to raise up children to her dead husband's name. And we have one of the most beautiful love stories of all times in the book of Ruth over this particular subject. Well, verse 11, if 2 men fight together, and the wife of the one draws near to rescue her husband from the hand of the one who is attacking him. So this is sort of nice, you know. This guy's got jumped, getting mugged, and the wife now is getting in the mix. She's on his back, hitting him in the head. But she needs to be careful if she puts out her hand and seizes him by the genitals. Very effective. Before the sports cup, it says, no, you shall cut off her hand, and your eye shall not pity her. Verse 13, you shall not have in your bag differing weights or heavy or light. Sometimes they had one set of weights when they sold, another set of weights when they bought. And God says, no, you need to have the same measurement. In verse 14, you shall not have in your house differing measures, large and small. You shall have a perfect and just weight, a perfect and a just measure, that your days may be lengthened in the land which the Lord your God is giving you. There comes that point where you're asking yourself, is God my provider or am I my own provider? And if I'm my own provider, then I've got to get creative here. I've got to stop tithing, stop giving offerings, start stealing, start being deceptive. I got to scrap and fight and deceive and do whatever it takes to get what I want. It's going to evolve to that point. But then there's the Christian person who says, you know what? God is my provider. What I have is from God's provision, little or much. And God can make me poor, God can make me rich, God can do anything in between. He knows what's best for me. But I understand that I'm not going to take this into my own hands and become a deviant. God is my provider. And if I begin to change and not follow God's plan financially, then God's going to take his hand away from me and say, you're your own provider. And I can't make it. I don't know about you guys. I don't want God to say, okay, I can't bless that. You're on your own. You provide for yourself and your own family. And this is in essence, he's saying, no, I don't want that. And in verse 16, for all who do such things, all who behave righteously are an abomination to the Lord your God. So God really hates covetous, thieving people. In verse 17, remember what Amalek did to you on the way as you were coming out of Egypt. Exodus 17. Do you remember that? How he met you on the way and attacked you in your rear ranks and all the strangers at the rear when you were tired and weary, and he did not fear God. Therefore it shall be, when the Lord your God is giving you the rest from your enemies all around, in the land which the Lord your God is giving you to possess as an inheritance, that you shall blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven, and you shall not forget. This finally came to King Saul in 1 Samuel 15. Samuel came to Saul and says, you know this passage of Scripture here, Saul? This is you. You go and utterly destroy the Amalekites. I don't want you to take anything from them. Kill their animals, kill their kids, wipe them out. Well, Saul went down there and he started saying, ooh, those are pretty good sheep. Those are pretty good goats. Those are pretty good. And he started taking the best. And then he even brought back King Agag of the Amalekites. He didn't kill him. And Samuel comes out to Saul and says, what have you done? And Saul says, oh, blessed be the Lord. I've obeyed God fully. And Samuel says, why do I hear the bleating of sheep if you obey God fully? Oh, that's for God. We're going to sacrifice that to God. Quick thinking. And then Samuel lays into Saul and he says, you know what? To obey is better than sacrifice. Rebellion is as witchcraft. Stubbornness is idolatry. And God this day has ripped the kingdom from you. It's a heavy thing. Now what is interesting is after that, King Agag's around for a few days. And then finally Samuel says, you're to kill all the Amalekites. And he comes over and just hacks up King Agag himself in the zeal of the Lord. But the story doesn't end there. Decades and decades later, we come to the last historical book of the Bible, Esther. And there in the book of Esther, they're now under the rule of Artaxerxes. And his right-hand man is a guy by the name of Haman, who hates the Jews and has a plan to wipe them out worldwide. And he's in the midst of this plan, almost succeeding. But it tells us in Esther chapter 3, verse 1, and many other places in Esther, that Haman was an Agagite. He didn't say I'm an Amalekite, although that's what he was. But somehow during the time when King Agag was in Israel, there's some women that are sort of weird, They want to have sex with a celebrity, even if he's a diabolical, wicked guy. And somehow in the time they left Agag alive, he ended up impregnating somebody. That child ended up eventually becoming the right-hand man of the greatest king of the world. And that right-hand man did everything he could to wipe out all the children of Israel. And God saw this. He knew this. And in essence, God is saying here, if you don't put the flesh in the New Testament, the flesh, it will destroy you. I know it's hard to put the flesh to death. There's a lot of wonderful, shiny, bright, exciting things about the flesh. But I'm not looking at right now. I'm looking at what the flesh is going to do you 50 years from now, when it will then take control and destroy you. And so we get the passion of God. In the New Testament, put to death the deeds of the flesh, right? Put to death the old man. Put off the old man. Put on the new man. Be zealous and repent and turn from the wicked ways. Well, Lord, we thank you for your word here tonight. And again, as we just go line upon line, verse upon verse, we do learn much about you. And especially when we look at the best commentary on the Bible's commentary. And we realize that even though you said many things here in the law out of concession, we get to the New Testament and we get the real story on it. And we see that you mention principles like muzzling the ox while it threshes out the grain, but you're really thinking more about ministry and how that applies ultimately to those who administer in the church. It's quite amazing to us when we connect the dots, when we get all the pieces of the puzzle on the table, and to see the beautiful picture of how it comes together. And Lord, tonight as we think on these things and meditate on these things, we ask in Jesus' name that you would deeply put into our hearts knowing you, understanding you. Put a great thirst and hunger in our hearts to read every page of the Bible, to know you thoroughly. You said it's not the wise man to rejoice in his wisdom, or the strong man to rejoice in his strength, or the rich man to rejoice in his riches. But all of us are to rejoice in that we can understand and know you. And in this you delight. You delight tonight in us coming to know you a little better. And we thank you for this in Jesus' precious name. And everyone said, amen, amen. I think there's a lot of fresh baked cookies out there still, and some coffee and other things to drink, and enjoy fellowshipping with one another. If you need prayer, come forward, and God bless you all richly. Bye-bye.